After the death of Moses, Israel stands at a turning point. The wilderness years are over, but the promised land lies ahead, still occupied, fortified, and intimidating. At this critical moment, leadership has shifted to Joshua, the longtime assistant of Moses. And the future of an entire nation now rests on his obedience and courage. God speaks directly to Joshua, not with vague encouragement, but with clear authority and responsibility. He commissions him to lead Israel across the Jordan River into the land promised generations earlier to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is not a new promise, it is a fulfilled one waiting to be claimed. God defines the boundaries of the land. Their territory would extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. God assures Joshua of divine presence, echoing a powerful reassurance. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. Leadership does not remove fear, but God's presence removes abandonment. 3 times, God commands Joshua to be strong and courageous. This repetition is intentional. Strength here is not physical power, but inner resolve, and courage is rooted in obedience, not confidence. Joshua is instructed to meditate on the law day and night, not as ritual, but as a strategy for success. Prosperity, God explains, flows from alignment with His word. Joshua responds immediately. He gives orders to prepare provisions, signaling urgency and faith. Even the Reubenites, Gadites, and half of the tribe of Manasseh, who had already received an inheritance on the east of the Jordan, pledged their loyalty, promising to fight with Israel until all the other tribes had received their inheritance. Before Israel crossed the Jordan River, Joshua secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim to survey the land, especially Jericho, a strongly fortified city that guarded the entrance into Canaan. This act was not a sign of fear, but of wisdom and preparation. Joshua had learned from Israel's past mistakes and chose a quieter, more focused mission than the public reconnaissance attempted under Moses. The spies entered Jericho and went to the house of Rahab, a prostitute, where they lodged. Her profession placed her on the margins of society, yet her house, built into or near the city wall, made it a strategic location for travelers and strangers. Their presence did not go unnoticed. The king of Jericho was informed that Israelite spies had entered the city that very night. The king immediately sent messengers to Rahab, ordering her to bring out the men who had come to her house, accusing them of spying on the entire land. Rahab, however, had already hidden the spies on her roof beneath stalks of flax, laid out to dry. She told the king's men that the spies had indeed come, but had already left at dusk, urging them to pursue the men quickly before the city gate closed. Once the king's soldiers left in pursuit toward the Jordan fords, Rahab went up to the roof and revealed the true reason for her actions. She confessed that the people of Jericho had heard of how the Lord dried up the Red Sea for Israel and how Israel defeated the kings Sihon and Og east of the Jordan. Fear had spread throughout the land, and morale had collapsed. She acknowledged Israel's God not as one deity among many, but as supreme over all realms. And because she had shown kindness to the spies, she pleaded for mercy, not only for herself, but for her father, mother, brothers, sisters, and all who belonged to them. Her concern extended beyond survival. It reflected responsibility and faith. The spies agreed to spare her family from death on one condition. She was not to tell anyone about what the spies were doing. She agreed and let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She also instructed them to go and hide in the hills so that the pursuers would not find them, and they were to hide themselves there for 3 days until the pursuers returned to Jericho. Before the 2 spies left, they told her that the oath they had made to spare her family once Israel took over Jericho would only be binding if she tied a scarlet cord in the window through which she let them down, and all her family had to be at her house and remain inside when Israel attacked the city. She was also not to tell anyone what they were doing, or else they would be released from the oath, and Rahab agreed, sent them away, and tied the scarlet cord on the window. Therefore, the scarlet cord became a visible sign of protection, obedience paired with faith. So the 2 Israelite spies left, went into the hills, and stayed there for 3 days until the pursuers returned to Jericho without finding them. They then returned to the Israelites and told Joshua of all that had happened. They said, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hand. All the people are melting in fear because of us." As the Israelites stood at the edge of the Jordan River, it was harvest season. The river was swollen, fast, and overflowing its banks, no place to cross, especially for a whole nation with children, elders, and livestock. Then the Lord gave Joshua clear instructions. The priests were to take up the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest that symbolized God's presence, and walk straight into the river. It made no sense by human logic, but the priests obeyed. The moment their feet touched the water, something extraordinary happened. The rushing river stopped. Far upstream, the waters piled up in one place, and downstream the riverbed was suddenly exposed. What had been a roaring flood became dry ground. Joshua commanded the people to move. Tribe by tribe, family by family, the Israelites crossed the Jordan, walking on solid earth where moments before there had been deep water. The priests stood still in the middle of the riverbed, holding the ark on their shoulders, until every last person had crossed safely. Once all the people were on the other side, Joshua chose 12 men, one from each tribe, and told them to take 12 stones from the very place where the priests had stood. These stones were set up as a memorial so that future generations would ask, "What do these stones mean?" And the answer would be told. The Lord cut off the waters of the Jordan before the Ark of the Covenant. When the priests finally stepped out of the river, the waters rushed back into place, just as before. That day, the people knew without doubt that the same God who had parted the Red Sea for Moses was now leading them through Joshua. Fear fell on their enemies. Faith was strengthened among the Israelites, and they stepped into the promised land not by their own strength, but by obedience and trust. It wasn't just a crossing. It was a declaration. God goes before his people, and where he leads, the impossible makes way. After crossing the Jordan, the Israelites camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho. There, they observed the Passover, and for the first time they ate produce from the land of Canaan, unleavened bread and roasted grain. The next day, the manna that had sustained them in the wilderness for 40 years ceased. The season of wandering had ended. They now stood in a land that would feed them, but not without a fight. Jericho was shut up tightly because of the Israelites. Its gates were barred. No one went out and no one came in. The city loomed ahead, fortified, silent, watching. Then the Lord spoke to Joshua with words that seemed almost impossible. Jericho had already been given into Israel's hands. Yet there would be no battering rams, no siege towers, no scaling of walls. Instead, Joshua received instructions unlike any strategy known to war. 7 priests were to carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Ark of the Covenant. The armed men would march ahead of the ark, and the rear guard would follow behind it. For 6 days, they were to circle the city once each day. They were not to shout. They were not to raise their voices. Only the steady sound of the trumpets would echo against the walls. And so they marched. Day after day, the people of Jericho watched from behind their towering defenses as Israel moved in silence around the city. No arrows were loosed. No stones were hurled. Just footsteps. Just the long, piercing notes of the horns. Tension thickened with every circuit. On the 7th day, before dawn, Israel rose and marched around the city not once, but 7 times. By the 7th circuit, the air felt charged. Dust clung to sandals. The priests lifted their horns. Then Joshua gave the command that had been held back all week. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. A thunderous cry rose from the people. The priests blew the trumpets. In that moment, the walls of Jericho collapsed, falling flat before them. What had seemed immovable crumbled in an instant. The Israelites went straight into the city, each man before him, and they captured it. The city and all that was in it were devoted to destruction, except for Rahab and those in her house, because she had hidden the spies Joshua had sent. Silver, gold, and articles of bronze and iron were set apart for the treasury of the Lord. Fire consumed the city. Smoke rose where walls once stood. And Joshua pronounced a solemn oath that anyone who rebuilt Jericho would do so at great cost. From that day, fear fell upon the land. The God who had stopped the Jordan and ended the manna had now torn down fortified walls without a single weapon striking them. What seemed secure had fallen. What seemed improbable had come to pass. And the people learned that victory did not come by human strength or strategy, but by obedience to the voice that had led them from the wilderness into promise. The city of Jericho had fallen in a way no one could forget. Its mighty walls had collapsed, and the people of Israelites knew that their victory had not come from their strength, but from the power of God. Before the battle, God had given a clear command through Joshua. Everything in the city was devoted to the Lord. The silver, gold, and valuable metals were to go into the treasury of the Lord, and the rest of the city was to be destroyed. Nothing was to be taken for personal use. But hidden among the thousands of soldiers was a man named Achan, from the tribe of Judah. As the city burned and soldiers moved through the ruins, Achan saw something that caught his eye, a beautiful robe from Babylon, along with silver and a bar of gold. The items were beautiful, rare, and valuable. For a moment he hesitated, remembering the command that had been given. Yet the temptation grew stronger. Quietly, making sure no one was watching, Achan took the treasures and hid them among his belongings. Later, when the army returned to their camp, Achan secretly buried the stolen items beneath the ground inside his tent. To everyone else, nothing seemed unusual. The people celebrated their victory, unaware that disobedience had entered their camp. Soon after, Joshua sent men to spy on the nearby city of Ai. The spies returned confidently, saying the city was small and only a few thousand soldiers would be enough to defeat it. Believing the battle would be easy, Joshua sent a small group of men to attack. But something unexpected happened. The men of Ai fought back fiercely. The Israelites, who had just seen the walls of Jericho fall, suddenly found themselves retreating in fear. 36 soldiers were lost, and the army fled down the hillside. Panic spread through the camp. The hearts of the people melted with fear. Joshua was deeply troubled. He tore his clothes and fell face down before the ark of the Lord, asking why this had happened. Had God abandoned them? Had the promise of victory ended? God then revealed the truth. Israel had sinned. Someone had taken what was devoted to destruction. Because of that hidden disobedience, the entire nation had been affected. The next day, Joshua gathered the tribes of Israel one by one. The process was slow and serious. Tribe by tribe, clan by clan, family by family, the search continued until finally the lot pointed to Achan. Joshua spoke gently but firmly to him and asked him to tell the truth. Achan confessed. He admitted that when he saw the beautiful Babylonian robe, the silver and the gold, he desired them and took them. The stolen items were soon found buried in his tent, exactly where he had said. What seemed like a small hidden act had brought great trouble to the entire nation. The story spread quickly through the camp, reminding everyone that obedience to God was not something to take lightly, even when no one else seemed to be watching. Joshua brought him, along with his family, his sons, daughters, livestock, and all his possessions, before the entire assembly of Israel. The stolen items were displayed to confirm the sin. Then Achan, his family, and all the belongings that had been taken were stoned to death by the Israelites, and afterward, their bodies were burned. This act of justice was meant to remove the sin from among the people and restore God's favor. Only after this was done did the Lord stop being angry with Israel. After the matter was dealt with, Israel was able to move forward again. Their next battle against Ai ended in victory, but the memory of Achan's choice remained with them. It became a powerful reminder that hidden actions can have consequences far beyond what one person expects, and that integrity matters most when no one else can see. After the fall of Jericho and the defeat of Ai, the news of Israel's victories spread quickly throughout the land of Canaan. Many kings gathered together, preparing to fight against Israel and stop their advance. But the people of Gibeon chose a different path. Instead of preparing for war, the Gibeonites devised a clever and desperate plan. They knew Israel had been commanded to destroy the nations living in the land, so they decided to trick Joshua and the leaders of Israel into making a peace treaty with them. To carry out their plan, they disguised themselves as travelers from a distant country. They wore old, worn-out clothes and sandals. Their donkeys carried torn sacks, and they brought wineskins that were cracked and patched. The bread they carried was dry and moldy, as if it had been packed many days before. When they arrived at the Israelite camp in Gilgal, they spoke to Joshua and the leaders of Israel. "We have come from a far country," they said. "Make a treaty with us." The men of Israel were suspicious. They asked, "Perhaps you live nearby. How can we make a treaty with you?" But the Gibeonites insisted they were servants from a distant land. They pointed to their worn clothes, their cracked wineskins, and their dry bread as proof of their long journey. They spoke about how they had heard of the power of the God of Israel and the great things he had done in Egypt and beyond the Jordan. The Israelites examined the evidence, but they made a critical mistake. They did not ask the Lord for guidance. So Joshua made a treaty of peace with them and promised to let them live. The leaders of Israel confirmed the oath with a solemn promise. But 3 days later, the truth was revealed. The Israelites discovered that the Gibeonites were not from a distant land at all. They were neighbors, living only a short distance away. The people of Israel were angry because they had been deceived. But the leaders could not break their promise, because they had sworn the oath in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. So Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and confronted them. "Why did you deceive us?" he asked. The Gibeonites replied that they had done it out of fear. They knew the Lord had commanded Israel to destroy the inhabitants of the land, so they acted to save their lives. Because of their deception, Joshua declared that the Gibeonites would live, but they would become servants to Israel, working as woodcutters and water carriers for the house of God. And so the Gibeonites remained among the Israelites, serving them from that day forward. Their deception saved their lives, but it also became a lasting reminder of the importance of seeking God's guidance before making decisions. By now, many had heard how Joshua and the Israelites had destroyed the cities of Jericho and Ai, and how the people of Gibeon had made peace with Israel. The king of Jerusalem also heard what had happened, and fear spread quickly across the land. This troubled him deeply, because Gibeon was a great city, and now it stood with Israel. So the king of Jerusalem sent urgent messages to other Amorite kings Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon. "Come up and help me attack Gibeon," he said, "because it has made peace with Joshua and the Israelites." And so 5 kings joined their armies together. They moved out and surrounded Gibeon, preparing for battle. Inside the city, the people of Gibeon were afraid. They quickly sent word to Joshua at the camp in Gilgal. "Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. All the kings of the Amorites have joined forces against us." Joshua did not hesitate. He gathered his army, his best fighting men, and marched through the night. Step by step, under the cover of darkness, they advanced toward Gibeon. Then the Lord spoke to Joshua. "Do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to stand against you." At dawn, Joshua and his army arrived suddenly. The enemy was thrown into confusion. Panic spread among them as Israel attacked. The Amorite armies broke ranks and fled down the road from Beth Horon. As they ran, the Lord sent large hailstones down from the sky. They struck the fleeing soldiers, and more died from the hail than from the swords of Israel. Still, the battle was not yet over. The day was passing, and Joshua knew they needed more time to finish the victory. So he stood before all Israel, lifted his eyes to the heavens, and spoke with bold faith. "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon over the valley of Ajalon." And the sun stood still. The moon stopped. The day stretched on, refusing to end, until the people of Israel had taken full vengeance on their enemies. There had never been a day like it before, nor since, a day when the Lord listened so directly to a man. For the Lord was fighting for Israel. And under a sky that would not darken, the victory was complete. After many battles, the land began to rest. Joshua had grown older, and though much had been conquered, there was still land yet to be possessed. But the Lord spoke to Joshua, reminding him that the promise would continue, that the remaining lands would be given to Israel in time. So Joshua began the great task of dividing the land. To the tribes of Israel, each received their inheritance, lands, cities, and boundaries according to the command of the Lord. From the hills of Judah to the plains of Ephraim, From the territories of Benjamin to the lands of Zebulun and Issachar, each tribe was given a place to dwell. The land of Canaan, once filled with many nations, was now being settled by the people of Israel. Caleb, strong and faithful even in his old age, came forward with boldness. He reminded Joshua of the promise made to him years before. And so Hebron was given to him, a land of giants he was not afraid to claim. And the land had rest from war. Cities were established, families settled, and the people began to live in the inheritance the Lord had given them. Special cities were set apart, cities of refuge, places where those who caused harm unintentionally could find safety and justice. The Levites, who served the Lord, were given no single inheritance of land, but instead were given cities scattered among the tribes, for the Lord himself was their portion. Then Joshua called the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, the ones who had settled east of the Jordan. He commended them for keeping their promise, for they had fought faithfully alongside their brothers. With blessing and honor, he sent them back to their homes. But as they returned, they built a great altar near the Jordan River. When the rest of Israel heard of it, fear and anger rose among them. They thought their brothers had turned away from the Lord. War nearly broke out between them. But before swords were drawn, leaders were sent to speak with them. And the truth was revealed. The altar was not for sacrifice, but as a witness, a reminder between the tribes on both sides of the Jordan that they served the same God. It was a symbol of unity, not rebellion. Peace was restored. So the land was divided, the people were settled, and unity remained among the tribes. Not one of the Lord's promises had failed. Every word had come to pass. There comes a moment in every nation's story when conquest ends and memory must begin. For Israel, that moment came under the leadership of Joshua, a man who had seen war, witnessed miracles, and now stood at the edge of his final days. The land had been taken. The battles had been fought. But the greatest danger was just beginning. Joshua was old, advanced in years, and with time comes clarity. He gathered the leaders of Israel, elders, judges, and officers, not to celebrate victory, but to issue a warning. Because Joshua understood something many nations forget. Winning a land is easier than keeping its identity. He reminded them of what had already been done, not by their strength, but by God's hand. It was not Israel's strategy that secured victory. It was divine intervention. And yet, Joshua saw a threat rising, not from outside enemies, but from within. If you turn back and cling to the nations that remain among you, the danger was subtle. Not war, but compromise. The surrounding nations were still there, quiet, persistent, influential. Their cultures, their gods, their ways of life. Joshua warned them, do not intermarry. Do not adopt their practices. Do not even mention the names of their gods. Because influence does not arrive with noise. It seeps in, slowly, until identity is lost without a fight. And then came the consequence. If Israel turned away, the very nations they tolerated would become traps, snares, and thorns in their sides. Victory could reverse itself. Blessing could become burden. Joshua's message was clear. Faithfulness is not proven in war, but in peace. Then Joshua gathered all the tribes to a place called Shechem, a place rich with history, memory, and covenant. Here, he did something remarkable. He didn't begin with commands. He began with history. He retold the story of Israel, from Abraham beyond the river, to Egypt, to deliverance, to the wilderness, and finally to the land they now possessed. Step by step, he revealed a pattern. It was God who called, God who delivered, God who fought, God who gave. Israel's story was never self-made. And then, after recounting everything, Joshua placed before them a choice. Choose this day whom you will serve. Not tomorrow, not someday. Would they serve the gods of their ancestors? The gods of the nations around them? Or the God who brought them out of bondage? And then Joshua made his position unmistakably clear. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. It was not just a declaration. It was leadership. Because true leadership does not wait for consensus. It sets direction. The people responded quickly, almost too quickly. They declared their loyalty. They insisted they would serve the Lord. But Joshua, with the wisdom of experience, challenged them. You are not able to serve the Lord. It sounded harsh, but it was honest. Because Joshua understood something deeper. Commitment is easy to declare, but costly to sustain. Serving God was not casual. It required holiness, consistency, and obedience. This was not about emotion. It was about endurance. And so a covenant was made. Laws were written. A witness was set, a great stone placed as a reminder. Not because God needed proof, but because people forget. The stone stood there as a silent testimony. You made a choice. You made a commitment. And one day, your actions will either confirm it or contradict it. Joshua's story does not end with conquest. It ends with a question. A question that echoes far beyond ancient Israel. What will you do after the victory? Because history shows this pattern again and again. Nations fall, not when they are weak, but when they forget who they are. Joshua understood this. That's why his final message was not about land, but about loyalty. Not about enemies, but about identity. And so the question remains, when the battles are over, and the promises are fulfilled, who will you choose to serve? There comes a moment when even the greatest leaders grow silent. The battles fade, the voices quiet, and history pauses to remember. So it was with Joshua. After all that had been said, after the covenant was renewed, after the people had declared their loyalty, Joshua, the servant of the Lord, reached the end of his journey. He was 110 years old, a life not measured in years alone, but in obedience. He had walked through the wilderness. He had stood beside Moses. He had led a nation into promise. And now he rested. No great ceremony is recorded. No elaborate farewell speech. Just a quiet truth. The servant had finished his work. They buried him in the land he helped secure. In Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim. Not in a distant land. Not in exile. But in the very promise he spent his life pursuing. There is something deeply fitting about that. To labor for something greater than yourself, and then be laid to rest within it. And Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and even after him, as long as the elders lived who had seen what God had done. For a time, the memory held. For a time, the faith remained, because there were still those who remembered the works of God. But memory, like fire, must be tended, or it fades. Joshua's story does not end in triumph, but in transition. Because leadership, no matter how strong, is always temporary. The question is never how long a leader lives, but what remains after they are gone. Joshua left behind more than land. He left behind a choice, a covenant, a direction, and a people who would now decide whether to remember or to forget. And so the servant rests. But the story continues. Stay tuned as we dive into the book of Judges and uncover the lessons within.
Did you enjoy the story? Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. This motivates us to create more Bible-inspired stories to share with you. God bless you.